Hey guys, so today I'm talking with author David Cancio, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself, what his project is, and a few other tidbits about what it's like trying to establish yourself as an author today. So, David, let's hear about you and know what you got going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So, my name is David Cancio. I am now 30 years old, uh, which is more difficult to say than I thought it would be. But so yeah, I'm a writer and I co-write with my father. This was something that we wanted to do for a while because my dad and I actually lived long distance from each other and wanted to find a way to spend more time together. So we actually started writing a series of novels about an attorney in Miami that basically all takes place in the 1980s, with one novel that will take place in the 1990s, 1991. But it covers the years from 1981 all the way to 1991. And so, just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, which is where the novels primarily take place. I did live for some time in North Carolina, which is, of course, how I met you, Drew. Um, and then obviously I'm back here in Miami because I wanted to be able to focus on my craft and truly be able to absorb the city. A lot of the flavor of the city has changed, obviously, from the 1980s. It's a little bit more international now instead of being very heavy Cuban, which is the main populace, if you will, of the novel. At a time when the United States was experiencing a huge immigration of people to Miami and seeing a massive exodus of people who were quote unquote original Americans, and just kind of seeing how that took place. So the neat thing about working with our novel is that in addition to being basically a fictitious lawyer world, which is based on true events, in addition to that, it's also a social commentary of what the United States was experiencing at that time, and then also seeing kind of being a microcosm, if you will, of what the world is going through right now with so much immigration and so much migration all over the place. What happens when you have such groups of people that come from different walks of life, different faiths, different backgrounds, and they just kind of move to one place and see how life changes. So it's been a very, very unique and very interesting experience so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what got you into writing, just initially?
Um, so what got me into writing is, I come from a very quote unquote artsy fartsy, um, artsy fartsy family. So my father is actually a songwriter both in English and in Spanish. Um, my father has written primarily ballads in Spanish, and in English he's done the same. In English he's written everything from classic rock to country music to um, commercial pop, etc. And primarily what he's done is that he's written with my sister Veronica and my younger sister Amanda. I have absolutely no singing voice, so I was never a candidate for this. But he does write and he orchestrated music with them. Um, he's always been the writing kind of guy. So I from a very young age was really brought up in a more artistic family, if you will, or I guess I should say more artistically inclined.
Right.
Um, my biggest influence really came from my father when I was a child. He actually used to write children's stories and poems. And so what was really neat about it was that when I was a young kid, I was probably like 7. I was in the Gifted Center in Miami at Springfield Elementary, and my dad came in with all these short stories that he had written, all these poems that he had written, and he presented them to the class, and the class got to draw, what they thought of it. So he had a whale of a tail, and he had a muffin with blueberry stuffing, and all these different things that he had written. And I kind of knew from the reaction that my classmates had, not only was this something really cool and brought joy, but it was something that maybe one day, I might be interested in doing. And I'm not going to say that my father pushed me to become a writer. That's not the case at all. My father wanted to be a musician and not a lawyer. And my grandfather said, "You have 5 choices. You can choose to be a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, an accountant, or an engineer." And that was, obviously there was a uh, Cuban generational thinking back then, and
Right.
then so being the child of a military man who was thrown into the Cuban Navy when he was like 16. So um, it's a little bit different. My father wanted to make sure that I had the choice to be whatever I wanted to be in life, and it just so happened that I kind of fell into writing. I took a couple creative writing classes because I thought it would be great just to kind of express myself, and I fell in love with it. And I can tell you that for anyone who follows their passions, you absolutely love your passions, you absolutely hate your passions at the same time. The the most difficult thing is being able to do your passions without allowing them to define
I have a few other friends who have gone and written like, their first book, whether it be novel or nonfiction, but it's definitely not a like, quote unquote normal career path. And what as far have you experienced as far as, like monetary sacrifices, what it's like trying to do this as a normal, like middle class, like working class person?
you. Yeah, so it's a couple different things, right? So this project, it's seven novels. It's not just one. If it were one novel, it would be a totally different thing, or perhaps if it were more spaced out. For example, I think that Anthony Doerr has written six novels, and I think he's done so over the course of about 25 years. Don't quote me on that because I don't know the exact math, but he's a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He's a fantastic author. I actually have his Pulitzer novel, which is All the Light We Cannot See, and it's an excellent novel. But the sacrifice that goes into doing something is, you're looking at what do you want to be your career, right? I want to be a writer. So have I put in 90 hours in corporate to advance up the ladder compared to my peers who might put in 90 hours? No. Have I ever given anything less than 40? No, I'm a professional. I think the least I've ever given in a work week is about 50 hours anyway. So the question is, what am I spending my free time with? Whereas most people will be willing to go to a bar on a Thursday and, just hang out with their friends for 2 hours or what have you. My thing was that I would finish my work at 5:30 in the afternoon, and then I would turn around and take a 30-minute break, probably grab either a cup of coffee or a soda, and maybe something to eat. Typically, it was a Pop-Tart in those days, which luckily here you can't see my stomach, but if you could, you'd realize it was definitely Pop-Tarts.
COVID's hit us all hard.
Yeah, no, it has. But anyway, so what I would do is that I would go into a conference room and I would lock myself in a conference room, or my office or whatever, from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock, and I would write. Sometimes I would write a whole chapter, maybe two chapters. We're talking at a minimum of about 8 or 9 pages. We're talking about 3,500 to 4,000 words need to be sometimes. And there were other days where I was only able to get out 500 words because it was more complicated. There might have been more distractions. There might have been more thoughts about where do I want this character to go? Where do I not want this character to go? And so there were a lot of different factors that come into play. But the idea was that especially when I was working and splitting my time between the two things, it was really difficult. And the truth is that when you're doing that, and you're running a job, you're actually seeing the trade. You were seeing the gamble of your dream and holding it up against the positioning of your peers as they move forward up the corporate ladder. It is very difficult when you see someone get promoted over you and you kind of think to yourself, if I wouldn't have spent all this time writing the book, maybe I would be promoted as well as them. Maybe you never hope to be promoted over somebody, right?
Of course, but
You never would want anything negative on them, but you wonder, did I chase the opportunities that were there, versus going into something that doesn't pay off? Because there is no direct payoff.
oh, of course. No, and to parallel it, writing multiple novels is far more work. So just so we're clear, I'm not equating, but to parallel that, that's like people will ask me, friends of mine that are interested in, starting making like YouTube videos. They're like, oh, do you make money from this? It's like, dude, no. Like it takes
No.
forever to get to a point. And it probably, like, I don't have the goal of that. Fortunately, my
Right.
job, I have a good enough work-life balance that this is something I want to do. It's a great way to connect with friends from college like you, or
Thank
other
you.
people that I can help, if I can. And it's at bare minimum. It's good because I have conversations that I can point people back to
No.
if they have a question that I've already talked about. But people don't realize that, and it does feel like it's a huge mental trade-off. Like the amount of time
No.
it takes, I can only imagine for writing a novel, because for just planning, editing, and like getting a like 10-minute YouTube video takes like 8 hours worth of work. Like it's obscene. And then, the fact that you don't get paid for it, except for like the 1% of people. And then even then
Right.
you're not talking about a salary job. Yeah, it's a huge gamble. That's why it's so impressive to me when I see people that have done this. And like I said, most of my friends that have written books before, it's usually like they've written like their first one, which is a huge accomplishment, but very ambitious. And I saw even
Yeah.
that you guys are printing it in Spanish as well as English. Yeah.
Yeah, so we were doing that. So there's a couple different things, right? So our main editor is actually a gentleman from Spain who owns his own printing press. And so the idea is that this gentleman is not only our editor for our work in English, because he is bilingual, and on top of that, he's also translated work into French. He's done a lot of different things. Um, but in addition to obviously being the owner of a Spanish printing press, he is an editor. He's worked for McGraw-Hill. He's done a number of different things. The man is an accountant by trade, but he's really a jack of all trades. He's a pretty amazing guy, and he's probably one of the funniest people. But I can't say this on the air. Some of the things that we get emails about because it would not be appropriate. But let's just say that he is a rather expressive and very funny man. But so the neat thing with this is, when you have an editor who is from that culture. This is a man who is Cuban, left Cuba in the Cuban Revolution when he was, 8 years old in 1959, moved to Spain with his family. Worked actually as the controller for GlaxoSmithKline, has really accomplished a lot in his life. But the neat thing about it is that, with him living in Spain, he's very immersed in the culture. He understands Cuban culture, obviously, because that's his culture that he came from. He understands what Miami is like because, at this point, Miami's a world destination, so people know what Miami's like now. There were a couple of things that obviously Miami in the 80s, he didn't grow up in Miami in the 80s, he didn't live in Miami in the 80s. So there are a couple of things that we've had to explain to him. But the point is that when there are certain mannerisms that we explain with our characters or certain reactions that are very stereotypical or archetypal, if you will, of Cuban people in Miami, he understands them from his Cuban background. But when we have to explain to him what the typical reaction of maybe a non-Cuban person or like, a Venezuelan person or a Colombian person being at that time, given the geopolitical problems at that time in those countries, and then dealing what they're dealing with in terms of the socioeconomic changes in Miami, then that conversation is a really interesting conversation when we talk about what parts to cut and what parts not to cut. The neat thing about having a bilingual attorney, which is our protagonist, he's the child of a Spanish immigrant mother and quote unquote an Anglo-American father. Obviously American, 100%. 2 generations at least. You're looking at a huge divide, or not a huge divide, but I guess a huge coming together of two different cultures in one person. And so what's really neat about working with our editor is that he understands that our character is commercial enough to be able to present this world in Spanish, but then obviously also for an American market, being that my father and I are both obviously now American authors, my father being a naturalized citizen, myself being a natural citizen born here. And so it's a really unique and very interesting and very wonderful mix for the three of us. But yes, he right now is working on the part of being able to put it into Spanish. Right now, we have not released anything in Spanish because we're still working on those contacts and working on those contracts for distribution, which is a whole nother ballgame to talk about. You want to talk about, just talking to a printing press about being able to give you money. Wait till you have to negotiate, your distribution contract. That's fun.
Yeah, which comes to another question. This is something that I've like read a lot / heard a lot about it with people trying to
Yeah.
figure out. I know people do a lot of like self-publishing through Amazon or having to find their own publisher. The rise of like audiobooks and like that whole gambit as well. What's it like as far as trying to figure out, navigate that? Because that's not something that a normal person even has to think about.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. When you look at publishing a novel, the first thing you need to do is you need to find an agent. So I'm not going to say this is like the NFL draft, but in a way, it's kind of like the NFL draft. You, as an author, have your talent. Think of yourself as a player, quarterback, let's say. The quarterback. If you are the quarterback that can throw the ball 60 yards like it's nothing, you have amazing accuracy. You're tall, so you can see over the front line. You can do all these different things, and obviously you're going to be higher up the pecking order, right? It's the same thing with your talent as an author. If you are an amazing writer, if you are very engaging, if you are writing about a comment, or excuse me, if you're writing about a topic that is obviously commercially viable. So, for example, let's say Joker versus Twilight, right? Joker is a much better movie than Twilight in terms of it being a social commentary. I think it's the only R-rated movie to ever gross $1 billion, which is unbelievable. It's an amazing work of art. And it was able to do that. Did it make as much money as Twilight? No. Have the Twilight books sold a lot more, in comparison to, uh, goodness, countless classics? Absolutely. Twilight has produced an amazing amount of stuff. 50 Shades of Grey has as well. So you have the difficulty of, your talent versus your commercial viability. And so the dream that you have as an author is to be an incredible literary author in terms of your talent and ability, but also being commercially viable. And so this is, like I said, the quarterback that not only is tall and can throw their line, but is accurate, is very smart, and knows how to shuffle, scramble, etc. So when you're that kind of a viable candidate, you then have to go out and get an agent. And getting an agent is a nightmare. And it's a nightmare because agents are trying to do the same thing. If you think about it, agents only make money if your books sell. And what's crazy is that there are millions of people who think that they can write a book. And I'm not saying this because I think I can write a book and they can't. Agents have told me when I've interviewed them, when they've gone to workshops, etc., that they will receive manuscripts that are just absolutely god awful, misspellings, and that's just to put it lightly, incomplete sentences, etc. So finding an agent is difficult because on top of the fact that they're having to put a lot of faith in whoever it is that they're talking to, they also receive a lot of bombarding emails from people who simply just they can't write.
Right.
And it's not because they can't write because they don't have the talent. A lot of them do have the talent. They don't have the persistence and dedication to make sure their work is as polished as possible. It's like looking at a thoroughbred and knowing that it's an incredible racing horse, or looking at a guy who's an incredible quarterback, has the amazing stuff, but he just doesn't have the head on him to get forward. Can't memorize the playbook, can't do this, can't do that. So then here's the fun part. After you get your agent, which they're going to take 15% commission of whatever it is you make, assuming that you make any money from, the publisher and then obviously the efforts, they are then having to work with their entire line of authors. So, there are very few Maxwell Perkins in the world. And just so you know, in case you don't know who Maxwell Perkins is, Maxwell Perkins found Fitzgerald, he found Hemingway, and he found Thomas Wolfe. Three of the greatest authors and literary minds, in world literature, let alone American literature. Very few people are like him. And he was lucky enough that he found Hemingway and Fitzgerald not at the same time, because Fitzgerald was more established than Hemingway was when they were younger. And then he found Thomas Wolfe much later than he found them. So it is absolutely critical when you work with an agent that you are going to be at the top of the agent's hit list. Because the better your agent perceives you to be, the better chance you have of your novel being published. Then here's the crazy part. If you wanted to get published, you then have to find the right printing press, which of course is publishing house. But I just say printing press because I'm stuck on the 1700s. Anyway, after you find the correct publishing house and the right niche, you then have to turn around and pray to God that you're at the top of their pecking order, because they don't release one book a year. They release hundreds of books a year. There are now, because of Amazon and self-publishing, there are now 700,000 books that get published every single year. 700,000. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. When you're trying to create one book that's going to be, supersonic over 699,999 other books, that come out, it is really difficult. And then you're talking about splitting up the marketing and the overhead costs and this and that and the other. And so this is why authors like Stephen King and John Grisham struggle to get more than 15%, because if you think about it, it's a huge risk that these publishing houses are taking just for taking you on. So your chances of being a published and successful author are probably about the same as, trying to make the U.S. national team in terms of soccer, whether it's men's soccer or women's soccer. Your chances are extremely slim. So if you do this because you're looking for a huge payout, you will never succeed. And forget succeed, you will just never be happy, because I could sit here and tell you that I'm the greatest author of all time and have an incredibly commercially viable book. And it may look like that based on the data that, of course, these publishing houses have gone into, the agents gone into, et cetera. But if people don't buy the book, it doesn't matter how much data you have. They will not buy the book. And that's it. And if they don't like you as an author, there's a chance they might buy the book, but it's unlikely.
People don't realize the how low of a payout it is, which, because I know we were talking before this and you were telling me that about Stephen King, and it's like, yeah, that's wild. Because to get that in perspective for anyone listening, when you're talking about percent of revenue that an employee, in your example with sports, like in the NBA and the NFL, they get around 40 to 50% of revenue in what their pay is.
Yeah.
And right now, the UFC fighters are actually, there's a case going forward trying to get theirs where they get a higher percentage of the revenue because they're only getting about 15 to 17% depending on what numbers you're looking at. So like
Well,
there's outcry for it being that low for them.
yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty slim.
Yeah, and the thing is, right, it ultimately comes down to risk, you know. So why is Amazon able to turn around and offer people, 33 to 35% or 30% revenue compared to a traditional publishing house? And it's a couple different things. For one, Amazon owns the methods of transportation, which makes it a little bit easier for them, right? Amazon can set up the deliveries. In addition to that, Amazon does not have an editing staff, so everything is self-published, right? You don't have an editor, you don't have this, you don't have that. I think that Amazon eventually will move to that, and I think that they will do so simply based on the fact that there's so much that they could use in terms of funding their own TV shows, because Amazon also owns the streaming component. So clearly they are, in many ways, they're kind of like Apple was, hey, let's come out with the iPod, then we'll come out with the iPhone, then we'll come out with the AirPods, then we'll come out with this, the entire system.
Yeah.
Just like BB&T, in banking, they didn't just do mortgages, but they did credit cards and they did this and they did that. Everybody's talking about trying to get you holistically. That's what they're trying to do. And so I think that Amazon in the next couple of years will probably create, just like they have with their video game department, just like they have with us, they're building out these different industries, making sure they're a dominant player in each and every one, Whole Foods, etc. I think that eventually when it comes to this, Amazon will become its own, will become its own printing press / publishing house and have their own on-staff editors and et cetera, because they're going to need to sift through all of the intellectual property that they're getting because they're going to turn around and try to turn them into TV shows, et cetera, as the demand for content goes up. That's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. We were talking about payouts, et cetera. If you are an author, your chances of a payout are significantly higher now than what they were before. And I want to make one quick distinction. So my father and I, at the moment, we are writers. We are not authors. And this is, if you look it up in terms of denotation, they're the same thing. If you look it up in terms of connotation, really by your peers, I think there's a distinguishing factor. If you are an author, that means that you've been published by a reputable publishing house, whether it's a small one, an independent one, or a large one. At this point, someone else has taken your work, recognized it, and said that this has value. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your commercial sales don't indicate that you have value, but this is something where an establishment has stated that you have value. So in my opinion, while there might be people who argue with me, I'm sure best-selling self-published authors will say this, or writers, excuse me, they will say this, but ultimately, if you are published because a group that is peer-reviewed recognizes your talent and goes forward with it, you have now become an author. Whether you're a successful author or a non-successful author, doesn't matter. If you're someone who just writes and then turns around and self-publishes, you at this point, in my opinion, are no more than a writer, which is not a bad thing. We need writers, we need authors, we need everybody. But ultimately, that is the distinction between the two. So my father and I right now are writers. We are hoping to become authors. We're hoping to become very successful authors because it's a dream of anyone. Yes, we do this for fun. Yes, we do this because we enjoy this. But ultimately, I would like to make this my final career, as opposed to having this be my night job. And I don't want to have to. I don't want to have to get to the point where I have to choose between family, writing, and my work.
I repeat
That's
this
exactly.
all the time because I remember in high school is where I first heard it. Whenever I was running cross country, I remember our coach was telling me that he's like, you can either focus you can focus on job, dating, school. You have job, like the normal teenage
Right.
things, jobs, dating, school, and then sports.
Sports.
A
Pick
human
two.
can't focus on all four of those.
Nope.
So you're gonna
It's
have to
just not
pick
possible.
two, maybe three, but if you go over two, you're gonna have to stretch one of those, and then you're kind of, eh,
Yeah, then you're only doing it, halfway or partial, and you don't
exactly.
want to do that.
Yeah, you don't
That's
half-ass multiple things, whole ass. Like.
I will say this for anyone who's a man who is aspiring to be a writer. Being a writer helps out a lot with your dating life. Um, in the sense that you get better at communicating, you get better at being more concise. you might know poetry, so a brief anecdote here. I went out for Halloween. I ended up speaking to this girl. We ended up having a very deep, meaningful conversation. In that deep, meaningful conversation, I shared with her some lines of poetry that I have memorized that I've always loved and I felt relevant to my life. I did not realize that there were 4 young men from the customer service department from my job who had just seen this and saw this girl give me her number. And then the next thing I knew, 2 days later, I get back to the office and I have a friend of mine who was, kind of like one of the managers at in customer service come up to me and goes, "What the hell did you do?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "I've got 4 guys in my office, or in the customer service department, who have lines and lines of poetry, on their desks everywhere, and they're just kind of repeating it to themselves, trying to memorize it. And they said that it's all down to you, that they saw you sweet talk, some girl and share poetry." And I was like, God.
That's beautiful.
It is, I didn't think that I was a trendsetter. It's funny because later on he wanted to know how good I was at reciting poetry. So he asked me, he was a 6'2" blonde dude asking me to recite poetry to him. And I told him, I said, typically if I recite poetry, like, it's going to be to a woman that I
Right.
find attractive, not to a dude that I'm clearly not attracted to.
Right.
And he was like, "Well, I need to know that this stuff works." And then, of course, I recited the lines, which were Douglas Malloch's Good Timber, which is one of the shorter poems that I know. And it was so funny because he said, "I can't believe that stuff works." I was like, "Did it work?" And he said, "Yes, my drawers are at my ankles and I'm not even wearing panties." And I was like, that's exciting.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
But
Yeah.
no, I mean, the neat thing about being a writer is that it's all about creating characters, right? And it's all about creating this world. So writing in and of itself is an act of self-discovery. That's why a lot of therapists will tell you to journal. That's why a lot of people will tell you to write these things out, to be able to get these emotions and these thoughts out. And I think that it makes it certainly more crystalline when you're trying to figure out what you want in something. That's why when you have a business plan, don't tell me your business plan. Show me your business plan. Write it out for me. Give me the details. Let me know that you've really thought this out, that you're in tune with the market, that you know what your target audience is. Who are the people that you're going to go after for your marketing campaigns, et cetera. What kind of product are you going to offer? Where's the value? And so I think the neat thing about being an author, or excuse me, in this case, for me, being a writer, trying to get to being an author is, right now I make the least amount of money that I've ever made in my life. I'm basically living off of savings. It is frustrating because at one point in corporate, I was making, very close to 6 figures, and I was very happy. Let me rephrase that. I had the illusion of happiness because at the end of the day, it wasn't, it was corporate. And not that corporate's a bad thing. There are people who succeed at corporate.
No, I get it.
But it was different because I had a more comfortable life than I do now. I think that anyone who's ever succeeded will tell you, if you really want to make it to the top, you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone to be able to succeed, because you yourself have to grow. And so what I would tell anyone who either wants to become an author or wants to do anything in life, be willing to sacrifice who you are to be who you will become. And sometimes it will not come true. You have to know in the back of your head that it will not come true, because you have to be realistic. But at the same time, you have to believe that you will succeed.